Koi sevorchu es b'nei Yisrael. Yivrechecho Hashem v'yishmerecha. Like this, you have to give a bracha to Klal Yisrael. The Torah commands the Kohanim, Yivrechecho Hashem v'yishmerecha. What is the koi? What is the like this? So the word koi has got lots of different levels of meaning to it. Halachically, the Gemara in Sotah learns out that koi means like this, meaning using these Hebrew words, Yivrechecho Hashem v'yishmerecha. Other tefillahs can be in other languages, but Yivrechecho has to be dafne in Lashon HaKodesh. That's the koi. Koi can also mean that like this, the Kliyoko says that Koi is a connection to the previous parsha. The previous parsha is the Nazir. The Nazir was not allowed to drink wine. Says the Kliyoko, Koi Sevorchus B'nai Yisrael, like the Nazir is not allowed to drink wine. Similarly, there's a halacha that the Kohen is not allowed to drink wine before he gives a bracha. So there's several different Koi Sevorchu levels of meaning. The Baal HaTurim says that Koi Sevorchu is connected to the bracha given to Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu is told at the beginning of Lech Lecho, V'heyeh baracha, you will be a source of blessing. And then he says, Koi Yezarecha, like this your children will be. So this is the Koi of Koi Yezarecha, is the Koi like this, the Kohanim should give a bracha. But there is here, I'd like to develop maybe a slightly more interesting theme of a connection that the Koi does indeed relate to the immediately preceding pasuk, which is the psukim about the Nazir, the man who has made a neder, has made a vow to abstain from, among other things, from drinking wine and becoming intoxicated. What is the connection here between the Birkas Kohanim and the Nazir? And there is here something very, very profound. The Nazir is given to us in the Torah as a double message in a certain sense. On the one hand, the pasuk says, Kol Yemei Nizro Kodesh Hu Lashem. The Nazir is a Kodesh. He reaches a certain level of Kedusha. And there's a pasuk in Amos chapter 2, where Amos the Navi says, you will reach such great heights that your children will become Nevi'im and Nazirim. So the Nazir is put on a level up there with the Navi. So there's something sacred. There's something spiritual about the Nazir, something great. On the other hand, Chazal say about the Nazir something very critical. They say, Lo dayecho ma she'osro Torah, she'ata osro alecha dvorim acherim. The Torah doesn't have enough prohibitions. You've got to dream up new prohibitions and make a vow, make the dorim to prohibit for yourself things that the Torah permits, like drinking wine. So there is here a very interesting thing, and the Rambam brings this down in Hilchos Deos, chapter 3, at the very beginning, and he says, this Maimah Chazal shows us that the Nazir does not represent the ethos of the Torah. The Torah does not have an ascetic ethos. Other religions got into asceticism of self-denial. In fact, it's interesting to note that in modern Hebrew, the word Nazir has been adopted to mean a monk, and a Nazirah is a nun. So the monastic vows that the monks and the nuns take to prohibit for themselves married life and prohibit for themselves physical possessions, vows of celibacy, all these things. This is a type of a Nazir, right? So the Rambam says that's not the way the Torah wants us to behave. The Torah wants us to grasp this world with both hands, every blessing and every asset and every gift that the world gives us, and then to use it l'shem shamayim, b'chol derachecho da'ehu, says the Rambam in Hilchos Deos chapter 3. In whatever field you're in, use your talents and abilities and wealth only to do mitzvahs, to do chesed, to promote Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. All this is b'chol derachecho da'ehu. Not asceticism, not denial and distancing oneself from the material world. This is the Rambam, Hilchos Deos chapter 3, and clearly giving us a critical view of the Nazir. And yet at the same time, he's Kodesh. What can we make of that? So here's an interesting thing, that actually Chazal did give us this double understanding of Nazirus. It's actually found also in Mesilas Yesharim chapter 13, on the Midah of Parishus, where the Moshe Chaim Luzzatto asks this question. We have found contradictory statements about asceticism, about separating oneself from the pleasures of this world. And one thing is clear from the Rambam, that actually, as a way of life, the Nazir is not a role model for us. But under difficult circumstances, such as, for example, a person might feel that wine has got a grip on his life, what we would call today addiction. The whole story of Nazirus is about addiction therapy. That's what it's about. A person feels they're addicted. They've lost control of their life, and alcohol has begun to take over their life. That's it. I'm going to make a vow. I'm going to make a vow to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not another drop will pass my lips. And that is, if you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, they make a vow that they're not going to drink anymore. That's the Nazir. But the Nazir is using his vow therapeutically in order to combat a potential problem in his life, because his life has gone out of control, because he's become, in some way, taken over by alcohol. And if it's true about alcohol, of course, in the modern world, it's true 1,000 times more with regards to drugs of various sorts that take a grip on our life. And as soon as one is in the grip of either alcohol or drugs, intoxications of various sorts, you've got your foot off the brakes. And therefore, you lose inhibitions, you lose boundaries, you lose your sense of balance and your sense of judgment, and the result is disaster. And therefore, Nazirus is an extremely important parsha in the Torah, even though it's not a role model for the ethos of the Torah, but it is an extremely useful and important principle about how to deal with potential spiritual dangers of overindulgence. This is a very beautiful connection to Birkas Koyanim. And for this, I want to have a look at the first pasuk, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, which Rashi simply understands to mean Yivarecha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless you with material wealth, v'yishmerecha, and once you have material wealth, he should help you to lock the gate and lock the door and lock the safe and protect it from the wealth being taken away from you. That's on a simple pshat level. Says the Antidote, it's much deeper than that. Yivarechecha means you should be blessed in whatever field you're engaging in. If you want to be a musician, you should be the best musician in the world. If you want to be an intellectual, you should be the most magnificent, have the most magnificent brain in the world. If you're in the financial world, you should be successful to become a billionaire. The Yivarechecha means to be successful in whatever you're doing, but, says the Antidote, every success contains within it a massive spiritual danger. What's the danger? The danger is the ego. The danger is that a person becomes very successful, the ego can take over, and the result is a level of gaiva and a level of arrogance which destroys his life completely. And we've all met people, I certainly have met people who were once wonderful people and good friends and very intelligent and very constructive members of the community, and because they became extremely successful, either financially or whatever else it is, the celebrity life, they lost it. Once they got into it, they've lost their balance completely, and they've lost their value system, and they become simply involved in their own ego, in their own celebrity status. And unfortunately, the world we live in, this is very much the case. So this is really the connection between the Nazir at the beginning of chapter 6 and Birkas Koyanim at the end of chapter 6. They're both dealing with the same principle. They're dealing with how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be involved in the physical world, but at the same time wants us to know how to set boundaries. Finally, the Gemara in Nedarim Daf Tes brings us anecdotally a very beautiful illustration of this idea with Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was the first Kohen Gadol in the Second Temple period, and he was Mishiorei Anshe Knesset Agdola. He still was part of Ezra and Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, the end of the Nevi'im and the beginning of the time of the Chachamim in the Second Temple period, and he was a Kohen Gadol. So he was one of the great leaders of the Second Temple period. And the Gemara tells us a story that he was very skeptical about any Nazir who came and wanted to go through all the procedure of Nazirus and bring his karbanos, and he personally didn't want to get involved until he met one young man who arrived on the scene, and he wanted to become a Nazir, and he was a young man of immensely striking beauty, handsome look with long curly hair and a striking countenance, and his entire being was of remarkable beauty. And of course, the Nazir has to become disheveled. He doesn't groom himself, and eventually at the end of his Nazirus, he shaves off all his hair completely. So the Shimon HaTzadik says to him, why do you want to do this? Look, you're a lovely, beautiful young man. Why would you do this to yourself? So he says, that's the problem. The problem is I was a shepherd and I took the sheep to the lake and I looked at my reflection in the lake and I saw that I was such a beautiful young man. For one moment, I felt that I could potentially fall in love with myself and become a celebrity, right? And I would lose completely my own spiritual refinement, and therefore I realized the dangers of my great beauty. And therefore I want to come and become a Nazir. There are lots of interesting questions about this story, but this story itself is a very fascinating story. I'd like to just add as a footnote here that Lahavdil Elef Havdalas, at the time of Shimon HaTzadik, was also the time of the great Greek philosophers and the writings of Greek mythology. And in Greek mythology, one of the most famous little stories there is the myth of Narcissus. And Narcissus is exactly this story. So it's interesting whether Chazal knew this myth and they were telling us a story to in some way give us a Jewish counterpart to this myth. Because in the Greek myth, Narcissus actually looks at himself in a reflection in the lake, sees how beautiful he is, and he becomes paralyzed and obsessed with his own beauty, that he can't anymore think of anything else for the rest of his life other than how beautiful he is, and he dies a horrible death, a horrible and lonely death, right? Because this has overwhelmed him. Chazal are telling us that a person in that situation needs Parshas Naso, needs Nazirus, needs a mechanism where he can say, this is a danger. I'm going to identify it as a danger, and I'm going to use Nazirus to make sure that my beauty does not become a curse, that it remains a blessing and doesn't become a curse. And that is really a very profound connection between this Maimah Chazal and Lahavdil Elef Havdalas, Greek mythology, which gives us a similar story, but with a different ending. And the different ending in the Gemara and the Dorim is only possible if one understands properly, using the Hamek Dovar, what the Birkas Kohanim is telling us, that every bracha needs a shmira. Every success needs boundaries. And the boundaries usually are Hatzneya leches im Elokecha, to live a life of tzniut at all sorts of levels, not to flaunt one's wealth, one's beauty, one's power, whatever gift one has, to keep it under wraps. And that is part of the secret of the Yivarecha Hashem v'Yishmerecha, and that is the Kais of Baruch Hu's B'nai Yisrael. Like this, that's what the Torah is telling us. Like the Nazir is able to find a solution using Nazirus, and with that he solves the problem of alcoholism. Similarly, the bracha the Kohanim give us should enable us to use every gift that we've got. And only, as the Rambam writes in Hilchos Deis chapter 3, B'chol derochecha do'ehu, to use it only for mitzvahs, for chesed, for tzedakah, and for promoting Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. And in that way, we can in fact make use of a Birkas Hashem in the best way possible, v'chein irot.